Okay, well, let's try it again. Hang on, I got to do
Okay.
a little fix here. We're recording right now. I'm having a chat with pianist Ian Gindes about your second release.
Yes.
I now know. Your
Yes.
first release was in 2016, CD release. This is from 2003, as in recently, your Navona CD release, Rachmaninoff Piano Works. And it's a
Yes.
really interesting, especially at the very end, quite an interesting, fun bit of surprise at the very end of the CD in terms of the music that you chose. But it's
Yes.
kind of we've talked a little earlier, and glitches are glitches. Now we're back. I'm going to try it again.
Yes.
But the point is that this has a very this your the way you have created a statement and an arc and a narrative with this CD is really very nice. Um,
Yeah.
some wonderful early piano music of Rachmaninoff's, the Etude Tableau, the Opus 33s, two from Opus 33 and two from Opus 39,
Yes.
which we talked about earlier, and very interesting, circa roughly around 1910, 11, and 1916, 17, something like that. In other
Yes.
words, pre-World War One, and then kind of in the thick of it, in fact, shortly before the 1917 uh, month of the 1917 revolution in Russia, where
Yes.
Rachmaninoff was and so on. And then it goes on with the Preludes, Preludes Opus 3, number 2, Preludes Opus 23, number 2, number 4, number 5, number 8, and then Preludes Opus 32, number 10. It all sounds like a bunch of numbers, but it's a very interesting
Yes.
progression in terms of the composer's maturity, really. This is
Yes.
very interesting, and yet, as we discussed earlier, the Preludes Opus 3, the number 2 in C sharp minor, is maybe from 1890 or 1892 or something.
Yeah.
Very early
18.
piece.
Yeah. It was first published in
So
18. It was the one of his first published works in 1893.
wow. Okay, and more Liebeslieder, wonderful Rachmaninoff for piano, very, not just wonderful, very interesting arrangement for piano
Yes.
of this Chrysler piece, Vocalise, Opus 34, number 14, arranged by Zoltán Kocsis. I hope I got that right.
Koshish. Sultan
Kocsis,
Koshish.
thank you.
Yes.
Kocsis. I'll try and remember that. And
Yep.
then the last piece, Alone in the World, Jerry Goldsmith and Jed Distler. Sorry,
Yes.
my eyes just did a double image on me. I'm getting old. Um, so
We'll
it's a
catch up.
very
We'll get
interesting
there.
CD. But let's just kind of go through the formalities. Behold, pianist Ian Gindes before us, doctorate in piano performance under Ian Hobson, master's degree in piano pedagogy from University of Illinois, master's degree in piano performance from University of Northern California, and you have been kind of focusing on this what you yourself say. I think in the program knows something on bringing the grand style to
Yes.
today's audiences, especially through music from the Romantic period and
Yes.
music by American composers. The first CD was American composers, yeah, if I remember a
That's correct.
brief check.
Yes.
And now what, so Romantic period. What? Let's just plunge right in. How come Rachmaninoff?
Okay, so yeah, that's a big question, right? When I was younger, my father was really into, well, he took the piano at a very young age. And my father, when he got older, would collect all these records, old LPs. And I remember he really would love to put on all kinds of classical music and a lot of piano music. And particularly one of his favorite composers was Rachmaninoff. So I think I was very blessed in that sense because he would put on old LPs of like Kissin playing when he was,
Mm.
I guess you could say 12 years old playing Rachmaninoff, and actually you mentioned Zoltan Koshish when he was a young when he was in his 20s playing Rachmaninoff concerti, and my father would put those on, and I was pretty much like I must have been about 7 or 8 years old, and I really fell in love with the composer. I just love his music, and it actually did. I thought it really did speak to me. Not that Schumann or Brahms or all those other composers didn't speak to me as well, but I think I guess it's kind of a love affair in a sense that Rachmaninoff has always been in my life, and this was just an opportunity to put out there. It's his 150th this year, so
Mm.
it was just kind of miraculous that that happened. I'm like, okay, this has to be released on his 150th. And if there's anything I do in my life, this is so important to me to actually get this out. and to, have this, available for people. And um, I always kind of, I always came up with the idea that, we owe it as interpreters to do the best for the composer, because their music lives in, eternally. So, I think that this was great. It was 150th, and it was to put it out. So, yeah.
Let's just stop there for a second because we're on a kind of a different track there, but it's very interesting to me, and I hadn't asked it in our earlier talks. Um, the recording is so clean and pure, and I probably sound like a broken record to a lot of people that
Yes.
would listen to this, but of course it is because recording technique is a high art all by
It's
itself.
it is become better over time, obviously.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So was there anything special about the studio, or don't, tell me was done in your garage, and I'll really have to throw up.
That would be the thing, to do it in the garage, and I'd say I faked everybody, and it
Well,
sounded so wonderful.
one day it will be there, and you know what? That's great. Everybody and their dog can become a recording artist. I mean,
You
I'm serious.
No, it was actually, we recorded this at Piano. No, I recorded this at Piano Forte Studio. It's actually about 4 blocks down for me.
Nice.
They have a Fezzioli. It was a 7 foot Fezzioli. It's a beautiful piano.
Oh, you're in
Um,
Chicago, yeah?
yes,
Oh,
in
well, that
Chicago.
explains everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and they have a great, no, yeah, they have a great recording studio there. And we actually, surprisingly enough, we started at WFMT, the classical music station. They have a studio here, and then after COVID happened and the
Mm.
pandemic, they shut that down completely. So we had to move it all over the place until we finally settled it in Pianoforte Studios. And the piano is beautiful, and they have great mics. And the engineer Rachel, that I worked with, I think Rachel Fraser, that's her name. She's probably gonna kill me because I don't remember her last name. Uh, but she was a wonderful engineer, and we just sat there and just we would just do this over and over again. Anne Marie, a good colleague of mine, she also has a doctorate in piano performance. She was my producer, so she would sit down and we would just, hey, here's Rachmaninoff. How can we make this sound as emphatic as possible? How can I convey this? And I just would work with Anne Marie, and we just really would just meticulously, sometimes do, over 100 takes, just to make sure that we got it right, that it sounded, what I wanted it to sound like. So we were
Anyway,
fortunate.
it's a beautiful job of sound. The sound
Yes.
quality is superb.
No,
Yeah.
and Rachel did a wonderful job, and the mics that they use were top of the line. So
So that was good. You answered right away a question that I didn't ask before our glitches happened, which is about
mhm.
your dad and his
Yes,
influence over you.
yes.
And what I wanted to speak to that about is, you know what? I've had a similar experience. What I'm saying is, ages to everybody out there, you parents especially, you all know this anyway. Kids at about 3, 4, 5, 6,
Yeah.
7 take
Mm.
in everything
Oh, they do.
for a lifetime.
Absolutely.
In other words,
Absolutely.
you became a pianist because of your dad, but also because that music was there. The environment
Oh,
was
for
there.
sure. No, and we were kind of talking before we started recording, just off the channel here. One of the I saw one of the pianists I saw, I think I was about 8 or 9. I must have been 8 or 9. I saw a pianist. His name was Enrique Perez de Guzman, a Spanish pianist, and he came over and played the Schumann Piano Concerto. And I went with my father to watch him. My father would take me to go see concert pianists play all the time, and I was very fortunate in that way too. And we saw Enrique Perez de Guzman perform, and there was just something what he did. He had so much, the way that he colored the piano, the way that he projected it. It was almost like he had an aura around him, and he was speaking to everyone. And it was so beautiful, and he was very charismatic. And I knew, like, at that moment, I'm like, that's what I want to do for the rest of my life. So I knew it. I was
Bingo.
like, this is it. This is it. And sure enough, actually, my father took me backstage to meet Enrique, and I have a picture in my office of me and Enrique, and actually he signed my Schumann
Mm.
uh, piano concerto music, which I did perform decades later. Uh, but and But one, yeah, that was one big moment in my life where I was like, that this is exactly what I want to do. So
And you just made me remember not what I thought I remembered as my first moment. I don't need to tell you about it, but it
yes,
was a little later. I was about 15. And, now, and what I mean is about being a conductor. I
sure.
remember now, thanks to you jogging my mind a bit, the moment. It wasn't earlier about music, which was
Hmm.
so, uh,
Hmm.
but I didn't have any idea what to do with myself, and I was playing clarinet, and I hated it. I hated the
Yes,
instrument. And then there was the moment with a particular
yes.
conductor,
Oh, it just and
crazy old guy. That
it's
was
so
it.
funny.
Yeah,
It's so funny, and not to get off on a tangent, my wife, she kills me because she's like, you knew what you wanted to do ever since you were a child. You were so lucky. And
it's
because I
true.
know that we never think about that because a lot of people do struggle to find, a job that they actually love and have a passion for. I was very fortunate, as a younger kid. That was actually what brought a lot of peace to me. And see, obviously I didn't put that together back then. I
Sure.
wasn't thinking, in that time, in that type of mind frame. But you listen to classical music in it, and I know that my father and I, we talked about this as well. We would take trips over in California, and he would put we had the tape decks back then, right? So he would put the tape of the Schumann piano concerto on, and we would have the coast in Los Angeles. It was just absolutely glorious, and
And nobody threw anything at you? That's amazing because I don't hear people playing classical music at all driving by in cars anymore.
oh my
It's
gosh,
come to that.
oh, you know what? He did it all the time, and it was great. It
Yeah.
was wonderful. He did listen to the oldies too, so he did
Oh,
have
okay. So
a
he could get by as a
yes,
regular guy, not a classical music freak. Okay, I understand that.
yes,
By the way, the good thing is that music are good. Although I'm glad I'll be dead soon because I'm from the old school: white tie, tailcoat, classical
yes.
training, conservatory.
Oh, no, I'm still there too with
You
you.
know.
I love that. I love the and actually the only thing that stops me from wearing the tux when I perform these days is it gets really warm, and then I try to have at least a little bit of air so I can breathe a little, my body can breathe. But
But
I love wearing the tails, and I'm definitely a very traditionalist as far as that's concerned.
okay,
So
but the thing is, we're all going to get over it, as you know, because the
yes.
good thing, as long as as long as classical music doesn't become popular entertainment, if you get my drift, where people go to hear whatever a orchestra arrangement of pop
Sure.
music and consider that the greatest classical concert they've ever been to. As long as it's somehow we can keep control over this, I think it's really great that young classical musicians
Oh, sure.
are they
No,
just cross over without even giving it a thought. They're here, there, and everywhere. They love everything. They're
no, I
playing it all.
absolutely, and you never know who you're going to influence either. I'm sure, I don't know, I might have influenced some younger. I played for younger children and stuff. I
You
hope
never know.
I've done something.
Yeah, you
So,
never know. Well, anyway, so that is all good, but we must discuss this recording.
okay, sure, sure. Yeah,
Oh, by the
yes,
way,
we
and
can we can speak for hours, I'm sure.
and then briefly, the other thing is that yes, are we lucky or what? I've thought about this a lot recently because I run into young people in their early 20s who have just graduated, bachelor's degree at college, and it's a
Mhm.
bachelor's degree in business,
Yes,
which means they don't have any idea what to do with themselves. They have not,
yes,
something snapped for those of us lucky, and we've been doing it
yes.
ever since. But I see these people that are kind of adrift. They've gotten their business degree so they can run a shop, I suppose,
Hmm.
but they have no idea. So we're very, very lucky. It's really
Yes.
a gift to have that magic where we go,
Oh, I
yeah,
agree.
that's it.
I agree. Absolutely.
Okay, so this, excuse me, CD of Rachmaninoff piano pieces is we kind of touched on it, but now maybe it's your turn to tell me this arc
Okay.
about how you made decisions. And we've already agreed from what you've said, it's a
Mm.
big deal to put out a CD. Then you got to
Yes.
raise the money for it, in most cases, and all the
Oh,
rest of
yes.
it. So yeah,
No, I think when I put this together, some of these pieces I played virtually like what 2 decades ago, and I knew that like some of them there were minor changes at the end, but I think the biggest thing was and me putting programs together for like if I'm doing a piano performance, I try to think about how much contrast I'm putting on there. In other words, I don't want it's a program to be lopsided, so I'm not putting on a program of just like all Beethoven, which I would enjoy that. but I tried to actually make it so that it actually would have some contrast. So you do have his etudes where, especially his Opus 39, where they become more, where he's more kind of evolving and trying to try things out a little even more. And I coalesce that with his preludes, which are more traditional. Those are a little bit earlier, so that's 1901. His Opus 23, 1901, 19 to 1903. And the way that they kind of worked, his etudes were at the beginning, and then I think that I kind of then you kind of goes into the preludes. It's kind of switched a little bit since the
Sure. Yeah.
etudes
Gotcha.
came after, but I think that it kind of coalesces in a way that it just kind of gives you an idea. The biggest thing was is that it's a primer of how his music has evolved, and you can hear, like we were discussing earlier, that it can kind of goes from the happiness, then it kind of goes really to a different type of feel, and then I think it generally concludes on a somewhat fair note. So
Hmm.
it's not too sad in that sense, but I think it just kind of ends off that way. So yeah, I listened to a lot of those pieces in order before I even recorded them, just to see, okay, does this feel like this is
Excellent.
moving on to the next piece? Does this feel like this is
Yes.
actually kind of connecting? And it did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, again, in terms of the Etude Tableau, we talked a little bit the two from Opus 33 and two from Opus 39, and
mhm,
there is quite a difference. We spoke a little earlier
yes.
about that. One is, as I've probably mentioned, is kind of like antebellum
Hmm.
Europe,
Hmm.
pre-revolution, pre-World War One, and by
Sure.
1916, 1917, you do
Hmm.
start to see a little darker aspect. And we have discussed also earlier that he apparently, it's generally understood that he was a kind of a depressed, had some difficulties with
Yes.
depression, but that is not quite fair. In other words,
No,
the character, his character was also melancholic, and so yeah, go
no,
ahead, jump in.
I think he was. I mean, there's no doubt about that. When he wrote his second piano concerto, I think that was written in 1902. He was suffering from actually a huge. I think that there was a big turning point. This is one of the stories that a lot of people repeat about his life. After his first symphony, the critics just basically demolished it, and they just thought it was terrible. And actually, I think it was Glazunov who was the conductor. And it turns out the rumor is that the guy must have been. I think they were saying that he was drunk. He wasn't prepared. It was terrible. It just was not received very well from anybody. The critics just really ripped it in half. And I think that for a period of time, Rachmaninoff, it was really bad on him. It just really affected him very badly.
Sure.
And I think that by the time he wrote his second piano concerto, he actually went to go see a hypnotist, and they basically, and I think it was Dr. Dahl, I think that was his name, and he went to go see him, and he actually got him to write again because I guess he would have writer's block because he
Hmm.
felt, just terribly insecure after his first symphony. But I mean, throughout his life, he did suffer from depression, but certainly not to the extent that that was very significant in his life, where he couldn't even do anything. And I think that he got out. I mean, over time, I think that I think that one of the biggest things that really was a detriment to him, and I think just for him as a personality, was that he was actually forced to leave, his Russian home. And I think because communism was pushing in, he had no choice. He had to leave. And I think, and to come to the United States was such a huge contrast in culture, from Russian culture. I think was very. I'm sure it was probably shocking to him.
Oh, it's
And
always
and
traumatic. Immigration
yeah,
of any kind is
and
traumatic. Yeah.
exactly. And I think that just from Russian composers and musicians, they all have a there's always kind of a very strong attachment to their homeland, and I know that for sure for Rachmaninoff, and I know that he wanted to continue to stay in Russia, but again, the political landscape, I guess you could say, was just really awful. And as you know, the Tsar was actually killed with his family.
Mhm.
I mean, he was ousted, and it was terrible. and I don't think that they really ever
There was no
recovered.
expectation of coming back
Oh no, and
in
I
the
don't think.
beginning,
Oh
in
no,
the 20s and so on.
no, and I think actually it's the story goes actually it's kind of interesting. He actually part of that traveling when he left, he was actually on a sleigh. They put him on a sleigh to travel out of there. Um,
Also, it was kind of an escape. I think I'm maybe kind of remembering something like that. But yeah, that's very well. How traumatic can that be?
yeah, no, and I
You know,
think it was tough, and he didn't have very much money. I think that he was successful. He did end up passing away, and he lived in Beverly Hills at the end of his
that's right.
life. And I
Yeah.
think he had a couple of other homes, but I mean, it was not lucrative for him at the beginning. He really did have to make ends meet, and he really worked as a concert pianist, which he did not like to do, and he did that for many years, and it subsidized his later compositions. And I think that that was pretty much what kind of set him, going forward, I guess. So it was tough for him.
Sure. And now that
So
you mentioned it, he never quite fit in. I'm again. I didn't do my historical research today,
mhm,
but
mhm.
as I recall, he really didn't quite fit in as maybe Prokofiev did when Prokofiev was in this country, or Stravinsky when Stravinsky was in the country.
And
For some
well,
reason.
and there were, and I, and I don't know about Prokofiev. I know um, Shostakovich. Um, excuse me. I think Shostakovich had a hard time. I think that
Also,
he had a really bad time because
you mean with his own culture or in America?
just with with the oppression of
Oh,
the
sure.
government in his
Oh,
country. Yeah, no,
yes,
not
yes.
with the yeah,
Yeah,
no. As far as
very
if we're
scary.
talking about anything, it's not the country itself or its people. It's generally the government that was oppressive. Shostakovich would basically just have bouts of crying. He couldn't because it generally the way that they ran things is it's hey, if you want to be a famous composer, you're going to do what we want you to do,
Mhm,
or you're not going to be a famous composer.
mhm.
And I think that that was the people that continue to live in Russia, and you could even do that for even concert pianists that like Emil Gilels who lived in Russia. You really had no choice. You either join the Communist Party or you basically you starve.
Yeah.
So there was they really were very tough on people. It wasn't very pleasant.
And now that you
So
mentioned that part of it, Shostakovich chose to stay, chose to try
mhm,
and live with the system. We all
sure.
know that he was not,
No, he was
and that
not
he was
thrilled.
in grave danger on many occasions.
Oh
What
yeah,
was it, Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk? He practically got lined up against a wall and shot when that
yeah.
opera
Oh,
opened.
it's terrible. I think there was
So
actually a story about Emil Gilels, the famous concert pianist, who actually the KGB took him into we're up in his room, and he came down later, and his hands were shaking because he was terrified. He says, "How can I perform tonight? These people, are terrible."
uh-huh.
And it was not good for
So just
these folks.
to bring this a little back into focus about your
No,
CD,
sure, I know.
but I'm serious in that this is all very good of what we're chatting about. Also because
Sure.
now let's bring Rachmaninoff into that setting, and and some of the other composers we've talked about and how other composers handled it, handled the situation of the revolution or of World War II or of
Mhm,
communism and the Soviet
mhm,
Union, all that,
mhm.
and I, this is where I'm a little vague. Didn't Rachmaninoff go back to Russia at the end? I can't remember.
I don't know if I don't think he did.
So
I don't think he
he died in the
I
U.S., did he? I can't
I
remember
think
either.
he
I
might
should
have
have
had a
looked it up.
summer home, I think in Switzerland. I'm
Something
not
like that.
even sure.
Yeah.
And but I don't think he lived there, and I don't think I think that that was it. By the time 1917, now I might be incorrect,
Mm.
but by 1917 that was it. He
It
was not
for,
coming. He didn't
so
come
he never
back.
came back. Okay. So the
No.
melancholy that we've discussed or need to discuss, because Rachmaninoff is a heavy and deep thinker, as
Mhm.
we've discussed earlier,
Yes.
and as I mentioned to you, I've been looking at a lot of pictures of him, and his
Mhm.
eyes see everything. He looks,
Yeah.
I mean, it's mystifying, this man. So, but you know
And a
how he,
very
yeah,
very incredible person and a very smart person.
yeah.
We listened to so much music, and I was uh, talking about there's Opus 39 number 2, which I didn't put on the recording. It's called The Sea and Seagulls, and I listened to that, and I was like, he really does capture the ocean. And I'm like, he really does it in his own way, where you can go and you could do the same with Ravel. And Ravel has a very, very interesting way how he captures the ocean and nature. Rachmaninoff has a very distinctive way in how he did that. And he was very smart on how he did it too. It wasn't just like, oh, this is going to be, pictorial or just it wasn't frivolous. It was very interesting to kind of listen to that and to see what he was doing, and that just really told me, that just really kind of showed me how uh intellectual he was about putting these pieces together. So a lot of thinking went into them.
Okay, but and I'm going to not but and I want to add this because I have had a revelation based on this anecdote you just gave me. I've been
Hmm.
really intrigued. I've been and I've been reviewing music by immigrant composers.
Hmm.
Okay,
Hmm.
over the past several months, for some reason, these kind of CDs have come at me,
Sure.
and the sea journey
Hmm.
is always there somewhere. There's a sea journey. Now, here's where I think I had a revelation. It's probably crazy, but
Okay. No.
Rachmaninoff had to have had a sea journey, and it's the sea journey most immigrants talk about, the journey to the New World, the journey to
Yes.
that long sea voyage of a week at least
Yes.
to the U.S. And it's a very, apparently, from what I'm gathering, from what I've been listening to and reviewing about these immigrant composers and where they always have some kind of sea thing going on. It's
Mhm.
a very sad, very deep, very melancholic thing. Not
Mhm.
that I'm not familiar with that particular piano piece of Rachmaninoff's, but as opposed to Ravel was, I think, were we saying La Valse, right?
Rebel.
No,
Yep. Sure.
not, you know what I mean. Who's the French composer who wrote the sea piece, Le Maire? That's Ravel. No,
Rebel. Yes. Yes.
thank you.
Rebel. Yes. I
Oh
believe it's Rebel.
God! And I'm the critic. I should
No.
be
No.
taken out back and severely lashed. Well, the thing is, Ravel. Now I hope I've got this right. For all the other horrible things he went through in World War One, but Ravel never emigrated. He never went on a sea voyage away from
Interesting.
everything he knew. So his La Mer is all very much about those delicious waves, and then you know what I mean. It's all
No,
a
for
completely
sure.
different approach. It's just
No, yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, it's
I
very
must write a book
melancholy.
about that.
No, I would think Rachmaninoff would be and actually, it's something that was interesting. So he did come to the States in 1903. Before he did come to the United States in 1903 to actually premiere his third concerto, and so he did that voyage before he eventually came over here for good.
Yeah.
He was already familiar with the United States, but actually, the way that story goes, he was practicing on a dummy keyboard on the boat of his Rachmaninoff of his third concerto before it was premiered in the States, actually by Mahler, and Mahler was
Oh,
conducting it.
really? I didn't know
Yes.
that.
Oh, it's
Wow.
unbelievable. I would have loved to. I don't know if that's actually out. I think he has recorded it. There are recordings of him doing his own works,
Mhm.
but I don't think there's. I don't know if it. I don't think we have the one with him and Mahler. And
Yeah,
I think
because
that was
yeah, that would have been, Mahler was
that. I
dead
think
in
yeah,
1911 or something. I can't
yeah.
remember, but yeah.
Well, I think I think the Mahler one was 19, that might have been 1903, that was 1903. That's when he came over. I
Wow.
think that was in that time frame.
Wow.
So,
I'm
yeah.
a ship nut, pardon me,
Yeah.
as
Yes.
in transatlantic ships of that period, the great
Yes. Oh,
beginning
wow.
ocean liners, the Titanics, the
I'm
Lusitanias.
imagining that traveling is not easy either. It's
Probably not.
not
And
it,
these would have been, if it's roughly 1903, we don't want to get off the subject too much, but
yes.
it would have
No.
been the earlier first steam ships, the two funneled
Yeah, and
jobs,
that
the
probably was
oceanic,
not a great
and
voyage
they're
at all.
smaller, you know what I mean, 23,000 tons as opposed to 50,000 tons. Anyway,
Sure.
well, so, but I just I thought about sea music and what it means to people in certain contexts. But I'd like to get to lilacs. I'm
What's that?
determined. I'm determined to get us focused back on this CD,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it's about. And I'm going to let you get in here, but it's about what I think, and you correct me. But there is this sort of gentle, uh, and what I mean by gentle is there's a gentle survey of
Yes.
Rachmaninoff, as we've mentioned, from
Yes.
the beginning of the CD to the end. And in this case, Lilacs, as I say in my little notes, it's just this delicate opening.
Hmm.
It's so gentle and like lilacs bending gently
Yes.
in the wind, the kind of thing. It's wonderful in terms of the narrative and all that. Tell us a bit about Lilacs, Opus 21.
Yes. So the lilacs. actually were written earlier, and it was written for vocal. It was out of his 14 romances. Rachmaninoff wrote those, and they actually are about lilacs and finding the happiness in the lilacs, and it's that's how the vocals go. And the music, it's interesting because one of the things you can kind of imagine what Rachmaninoff was doing is that he was using the wind to his advantage in that piece. So when you get the very big flourish at the end,
Mm.
I always feel that he's like the little gusts of wind happening, the lilacs are blowing, and then there's one big just gust of wind at the end, and it just kind of just it goes
Oh,
off, and then it ends. It's sensational. It's just beautiful
yes.
how he did it, and I know that that's what he was intending. And the only reason why I do know that is because I think just looking at all the way that he kind of characterized his other pieces and how they were done, particularly his Etudes Tableau, which we do know some of those they actually did have themes.
Mhm.
Some of them he would not mention the themes to, but some of them do have themes, like I was mentioning the sea and seagulls. I could see how he was doing that and how he was doing that with the music. Um, and it's very, very distinct. You can really pull it out of there, and that it makes it challenging because you don't want it to sound like a bunch of notes going up on the piano. You really want it to kind of sound like a wind blowing through, and to make that happen is it's pretty challenging.
That's a
So,
great technical challenge for sure. And as we've discussed already, the recording, the capability in the instrument you recorded on, what I in my notes here, it's what I love is when every note is clear, the instrument, the acoustic of the recording session, when I can follow all these inner workings just really clearly. I'm not struggling. You're not struggling,
no.
supposedly. You're probably
Oh,
sweating logs.
oh, it
Uh,
was definitely a struggle to put it together, but you
but
know how that is,
But
right?
also, I think I read, correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't this around his marriage or he was in love with
Yes,
someone?
actually, I think that was when he did get married that year. It
1930s?
there's also a wonderful story, and this is actually it is related. I promise I'm not going to get off on a tangent here. He actually, when he would perform in Russia, he would actually see a stack of lilacs on his piano every time he was
Oh.
done, because at the end. And this happened over and over again. Like he had this admirer. Apparently, decades later, this lady came to him and said, I was the one who was putting the lilacs on your piano. I wanted you to know that. And
Mm.
she did it every performance. After every performance, she would put they would put all the flowers up there. She would have the lilacs on the piano. And that was kind of a really interesting story just that ties that in. Um, the piece is absolutely gorgeous, and the way that again the way that and it's only 4 pages. It's not a big piece, but I think the way that he puts it together, it's very creative, and it's very nuanced in the way that you could tell, exactly what he was trying to intend from that piece. And it is kind of like you were saying, it's not dark. It doesn't kind of go into that mode. It's written in A flat major, so it's a little airy, and it has that nice sound to it. And I don't think that he wanted it to be beautiful in its sense, but it is deep, I think, in its own way. So
Well, certainly in its narrative way,
yes,
you can hear, you
oh
can
sure,
see the lilacs blowing. I can, I mean,
absolutely,
and just all the imagery that their own, everybody has their own imagery to the piece, but that's
sure,
the glory of it. But my point is that the album, if there's a direction here, the album begins with a young in love
yes, oh for
Rachmaninoff.
sure, yes,
Okay,
absolutely, yes,
and
yes,
then you go
absolutely,
down.
very happy, very,
Yes, it's
in
just
that
charming,
sense,
just
yeah.
charming. And
So.
then the Opus 33 Etude Tableau, the number 4 and the number 8.
Mhm.
And again, I've always, when I see minor keys, I know the composers know exactly what those minor keys are supposed to
Oh,
be
for
about. So
sure,
especially G
yes,
minor and D minor. So I knew
yes.
things would be, but it maybe a little darker. And again, we're looking at
Yes.
roughly 1911. I think for these two
Yes.
from Opus 33, which is to say as we've discussed probably ad nauseum, pre-World War One, but
Yes.
things are percolating toward it
Yeah.
in 1911. But I remember that I quite liked both of them. I still was not hearing what I kind of always in my heart feel about this Rachmaninoff, this kind of melancholic and sort of sad
Mhm.
thing.
Mhm.
Talk about these two, the Opus 33 number 4 and the Opus 33 number 8, the D minor and G minor etude cello.
There and one of the so the one the march is actually it's pretty so the way that I put that together, um again, I think what Rachmaninoff was trying to do with the Etudes Tableau is I think it was very similar to what Mussorgsky did with the pictures at an
Mm,
exhibition. And I think that that's what he was trying to do. He was actually trying to give images. And so Rachmaninoff was kind of a trickster in that sense. He didn't want to tell you what those images were at first. But what happened was is that they actually paid for him to they wanted to have some of those pieces orchestrated. So they came back and they said, "What were you intending to do here? Can you please fill us in?" So he gave us some hints on
mhm.
some of them.
And then
So
regretted it, right? If I'm not mistaken.
I don't know if he regretted it, but no, but that I guess when they wanted to, when they put those together and they orchestrated them, so there are images that he was trying to convey, and I think the march in particular, what I try to do, there's a kind of a dream type of feel to it, and then out of that comes this march,
Mhm.
and then all of a sudden it fades out, and I don't, and yes, that was what I did, but it was Rachmaninoff who really intended it, I think, to be that way. I think he wanted it to drop in, and this is your picture, kind of similar to the pictures at the exhibition. You're moving to the next picture, it comes into focus, and then it kind of just coalesces, and then it fades away.
Mhm,
And I
mhm.
think that that also goes with his other piece that he did, the Opus 33, the other one I did
The,
record
the
on there too.
the number 8, the G minor, number 8.
Yes, yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So for that one in particular, the same deal. It starts off very slow, and you get a very enchanting idea with
Mhm.
that. Not as much as the march, I think, but I think it's very specific as to what he was
It's a
trying to go for.
meditation. I see I use
I
the word
would think
meditation a
so.
couple of
I
times.
I would think so. And then you can't
There you go.
forget. I think it's interesting. Rachmaninoff had a love for like painters like Boecklin, Arnold Boecklin, who
No
you look
idea.
at. Well, he's oh my gosh, if you look at these paintings and how we were talking about earlier before we started this, kind of this goth type of feel to his music. And
Interesting.
a lot of romantic paintings, if you look at romantic paintings in that kind of that time period, well, especially Boecklin, like they have some here in Chicago. I think they had two in there, and they're crazy. They have like all these evil elves and ghouls, and it's dark, you know. So when people say, "Oh, and this is what I disagree with, like, "Oh, Rachmaninoff's such a dark person, and he's depressed, and that's why his music is depressed," I'm like, "No, no, 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 no." I think that well, okay. Let's be fair and say, yeah, that came into his music, that type of melancholy,
Especially later
but he
with
was
times and
very yeah, but he
circumstances and
was
other things.
very intelligent. He wanted it to be dark because he was intending it to be that way. He was
So,
trying to paint an image.
yeah.
So I think it was more in depth. He was very smart. Again, that the other A2, the Opus 33, the other one, not the March. The other one also kind of is, yeah, it is very meditative in its sound, but it's very specific, and it kind of draws you into that type of romantic feel. And if you see romantic paintings, you're kind of it just dawns on you. You're like, this is what he was trying to capture in his music. He really was very distinct as far as what he was trying to do here. So
You know what I
very,
think?
very smart.
I think you've been hanging out with some bad folks who've been saying, ah, that Rachmaninoff is just all junk.
Oh my gosh. Oh, you know what it is? And I won't get on this, but at the risk of not, well, I don't want to be negative, but yeah, I think a lot of scholars really did. I don't know if they, and
We
this is, I
chatted
think,
about this, that they kind of wrote him, at a certain
yeah,
point, kind of wrote
at
him
the
off as a,
beginning, a lot of people were not rubbed the right way with him for some odd
mm,
reason. Like if you look at the New Grove and you look like back when the critics were reviewing his stuff, they like, often accused him of being awfully morose.
yeah.
Aaron Copland, the composer, could not stand his music. He thought it was overly saccharine. So, it's just I don't
Why
think that
that
he
old
got
nut sourpuss? We're gonna have to do. Oh, he's dead.
oh
Why
my God.
we can't TP his Copeland's house?
That
All
that
right,
might have been hit, and that also, and I'm not fair too because
but
that
that's it.
probably
It's
was him.
interesting.
Him, they were
Yeah,
probably
yeah.
competing with each other, I would
But I
imagine.
remember
But
that, and it's about how composers come and go in terms of the favor, mainly amongst their colleagues who are the worst. But
oh,
I
and
remember
I've
that
heard
also,
what
where Rachmaninoff kind of was considered facile or not very
yes.
interesting or
Oh,
repetitive.
I've heard there was a comment that somebody made the other day. It was kind of interesting on his Paganini Rhapsody, and not to get off, I'll be really
But go
quick.
ahead, yeah.
But anyways, the he uses the dies irae
Huh?
melodic line,
Yeah,
which is basically for requiem
yeah,
masses, right? So it's
correct.
not, and I think the critics said something to the extent, "Wow, I like this pianist how they played it because they didn't play it so dark." And I'm like, but that's what he was intending to have happen there. It wasn't, and I don't think he was intending it because he wanted to bring people down. I
Mhm.
think he was intending it because he was expressing it the way that he was being very smart about it. This is what he wanted to convey,
Mhm.
and using that type of melody, he was using it in a way that he and yeah, it kind of became dark in that way. But
Well,
again,
and
I
it
don't
had a
think
perfect right to become dark. It is the
yes,
Dies Irae, after all.
yes,
But I mean, the
it
whole
was
thing, the intention is
yes.
couldn't be clearer. It's
But
here,
I don't
folks.
think it was
Remember?
Rachmaninoff's intention to say, "I want people to be very depressed
Of
of my
course
song."
not.
That's that,
Yeah,
yeah, no.
yeah,
And I don't think that I think that to see that, no, I don't think that's totally
yeah.
correct at all. So,
And remember, once upon a time, I'm not saying I'm not a critic. Remember, I'm a musician.
yes.
But once upon a time, the critic was the guy who had been, wrapping meats in the meat department earlier in the day, and they said, "Hey, Joe, you want to catch the Philharmonic tonight? Turn something in later."
It's
Okay,
true. There's some good critics out there though, and I know
thank
some
you.
really good ones, but there's some really bad ones, and they I think they just kind of
Also,
they need to,
attitude. They get the
yes.
wrong attitude,
Yes.
which is weird.
Well, and I think Rachmaninoff didn't get really a fair shake, though his music, as you know, is celebrated by everybody today. Everybody loves his music. I could talk to everybody, and they're like, "Oh, I love Rachmaninoff. Oh, Rachmaninoff's my favorite," and they don't do classical music, and they know who he is.
Oh, the tunes are
So
irresistible. I mean, that's just all
yeah,
there is. Now, speaking
absolutely,
of tunes,
yes. And I put some of those on there that are
you
very
put
popular, right?
this thing is solid tune, and this is one
Yeah.
of those where I say to myself, I'm in an apartment, so I don't generally crank the stereo like we used to back in the 70s.
Yes.
But this is one of those
Oh, I
albums
do
that,
that. I do that for sure. I still
but
do that.
you
But go
do
ahead. I'm sorry.
even now,
Yeah.
even in your apartment?
Oh,
No, or you have a
well, I get
house.
in trouble. My wife tells me to turn it down, but I
Oh,
love listening to it loud. I admit,
yes.
yes. So,
Okay, well, I'm proud of you because we usually have to put up with the other kind of music.
oh
Blasting through
gosh,
apartments.
okay,
Anyway, bottom line is
yeah,
this is one of those, it's beautiful. It's just gorgeous, gorgeous
yes,
music. And we are not yet done. I'm trying to keep track here. We got about 15
yes,
minutes maybe
okay, all right,
before, it
sure,
gets a little dicey, let alone the tape machine shutting down or, whatever
okay,
happened recently.
sure,
So we've gone through Lilacs. I'm trying to describe the arc of this CD.
yes,
Lilacs, beautiful. The man is young and in love. The Etude Tableau are and then pre World War One, and then kind of in the disturbing bits of it. That's so interesting, and
hmm,
we're beginning to see his maturing style of composition, and things are getting thicker and more interesting, and
yes,
the harmonic
yes,
movement and all that. So now we're at the preludes.
hmm,
We have an Opus 3, and you have mentioned, or we have talked. This is like in C sharp minor. You gave me the anecdote, excuse me, off
yes.
camera about how he hated because he was always being asked to
Oh, he
play
couldn't
this one.
stand it. Yeah,
And it's
he
from the
couldn't stand it.
1890s, early 1890s, and it's just
Yes,
charming. So I'm
yes,
thinking, see, I'm already, I'm going into my second third of this album of yours, and I'm
mhm,
saying to myself, with the moments, around World War One where things are not dark, let's stop using that word, but
mhm,
are a little more aware that stuff's not right, let's say. But then you give me this Opus 3 number 2, and it's delightful and so on. But things
mhm,
begin to he really matures in the Opus 23 and
yes.
especially the Opus 32 number 10.
Mm.
Give me that chronology. We're looking at five pieces. Give me that chronology that now did he put this together? I think you mentioned to me somewhere that he deliberately removed some pieces from somewhere.
Yeah, he did. it. Well, I think he was so his opus. So to very quick on his C sharp minor prelude. So he
Yeah,
yeah he didn't like it because he was forced to play it all the time as an encore. I think the reason why he didn't like it is again it was his earliest piece. It was the first published piece in 1893, and I think that um, it shows his youth. It doesn't show a lot of like his Opus 39 Etudes Tableau, where he's being more, he's kind of just getting out there. He's experimenting more, and I think that's why he didn't like to play it a lot, because I don't think that he probably felt that it didn't make him hold him in the best of light, I guess. Or but I think if you do listen to it though, it does give a strict foundation of where a lot of his music went. His climaxes, which are fantastic in his pieces, you can hear it in that, and it's just that carries through so much of his music.
because this is where I'm
He's always
beginning
gives us
to. This is where I say to myself earlier today as I was listening to this. I think you've got it right. The preludes I begin to hear this him becoming himself, finding himself as a composer and everything. Am
yeah.
I have I hope I haven't misparaphrased you, but
Well, I think more of his Opus 39. It was more of Opus 39 is where
hmm.
he started to become more adventurous and more,
Oh, I
and
see
I
what you
think
mean. Yeah,
yes,
got you. The
his
etude.
Opus
Yeah.
39. Opus 39, by that time, his music starts to become more modal. I would actually even argue to say that it starts to become, I won't even say it's kind of moving towards jazz, because that would be too much of a move, but it's almost kind of moving in that direction. And another thing that Rachmaninoff one of the things that characterized his music was the use of the open seventh chord, and that's definitely in jazz music. And I think that that's where he kind of started moving towards that, and he started, experimenting with different types of ways of putting his music together. More so in his Opus 39, his Opus 23. I'd like to say that those are kind of more of his youth, of him really kind of just,
And that makes sense
very
also. Yep.
strong, very strong romanticist.
Yep.
Not
Absolutely.
necessarily. I wouldn't. I guess you could say a neo-romantic, but
Sure.
not as more. I would say his Opus 39 is kind of like he's kind of going into. I mean, particularly his Opus 39, number one in C minor, sounds so much like his fourth piano concerto.
Mhm.
He kind of starts to move towards different ways, and just kind of
Mhm.
experimenting more. Um, and I think so. So I think that you kind of hear the more traditional romantic music in his march, in his G minor march, his one of his famous Opus 23, and then his C sharp minor prelude again. That actually that was not a part of his Opus 23 at first. That was added to his Opus 23 so he can have a full set of 24, which included his
Ah,
23 and 30 and
gotcha.
32 opuses. That was added to give him a complete set of 24.
And actually, just as we're talking
Yeah,
tonight, I'm finally, there's a lot here on the plate, but what I'm
yeah,
finally seeing is just the opus numbers tell me
mm,
plenty, and
yes,
I've been a little backwards based in my feeling about what I'm hearing based on the
sure,
without looking at the opus numbers. And you see what I mean? So
yes.
there's a may I congratulate you on a CD that requires multiple listenings to begin to get it all sort of to sort itself out. But again, what's fascinating is this is you can hear this man changing.
Yeah, no, and well, I think that what you do here, whereas his Opus 39s, like I said, are kind of a little bit more. He's going outside of the boundaries. He's trying to kind of do a little bit different, uh, trying to experiment a little bit more. Again, they're more modal in the way that they're formulated. His you kind of get back to his Opus 23. You're like, okay, these are kind of, in a sense, these are kind of like his mid days, his romanticist days,
Mhm.
kind of looking to Robert Schumann,
Yeah,
Brahms, and
he's young.
Chopin,
Yeah,
and really kind of drawing from them. And I think that he does develop obviously there is a voice for him. You can't say that, oh my gosh, his music sounds completely like somebody else's. He
mhm.
does have his
No,
own voice,
absolutely. That's also
but
very interesting.
I think that it just develops more as time went on. And I think he actually fully, I guess you could say some composers never fully matured. I think that he pretty much fully matured towards the end of his life. And he went pretty much as far as I think that he could go. Um, again, I think he probably would have rather composed more, but I think that, we do get an idea, and particularly in that CD, you get an idea of his light side of him. You do get
Hmm.
the
The
very
youth.
dark, melancholy side of him in there. You get that. You get a lot of passion that's extremely hard to
Yeah.
convey that's in there. Um, Especially in his D major opus 23. That is an incredibly difficult piece to play in front of the public, because
Number four. Yeah.
it's so, how can I say it? It just digs
Absolutely.
so much into the heart, and it's
Yeah.
really hard to really. It's almost like you have to wear your heart on your sleeve when you perform it.
I'm just looking
So
for my notes on it too. Keep talking while I try and
yeah,
dig this one up.
yeah.
Um, what is it again? It's Opus 30, the number eight? No.
Opus 23, number, I think it's number 4. I'm gonna look at here. So I have it right here in front.
Okay.
I have to look here. Yeah, it's Opus 23, number 4 in D major, which
Okay.
is phenomenal.
Okay. Yeah, I know. At this a gorgeous interpretation of the piece. I might as well
Yeah.
pass on to you. Beautifully performed. Oh, I'm remembering now. I
Yes.
make a note to myself about Opus 23, number four, this in D major.
Hmm. Yes.
But that it's so very quiet and calm,
Yes.
like a lullaby.
Yes.
This week, no, and people would remember this piece, I think. Um, but you take a very a quite slow tempo, I think,
Yes. Yes.
and it is all the more touching.
No, and that was what I wanted to do with that. Now, at first, actually, I was a little bit concerned. My producer came to me and she's like, now, do you want to play it that slow? And I'm like, yeah, I really do. And
Oh,
and it wasn't kind of like, well, this is Ian being Ian. I think it just made it so much more effective, by starting it slow. It's not like the phrasings were broken in the way that I did it.
no,
If the phrases would break, then that would be an issue technically.
yeah.
I wouldn't try to slow it down to the point where you could not actually, feel the music line and where it was going. But I think the hardest part about that piece, and I think I did that piece, that's the one I'm probably the most proud of on that
Mm,
recording, is that it builds so much that it pulls back, and then
yeah,
it
I'm just
really
looking at that.
builds at the end, and then it's almost like he just lets out. It's just like everything needs to come out here at this point, and I can't really make out for many pieces. Well, maybe his second symphony where he does that, where it's just like
Yeah.
I'm I'm going to unleash it. This is exactly how I
And then
am.
it will pull back. The tide will go out for a while, and then there'll be
Yes.
another onrush in the Second Symphony, just as an example.
Oh, for
What?
absolutely. And I think that, yeah, and then of course, again, what Rachmaninoff was very good at doing is the interest I think that he brings to people is that, again, like talking about those climaxes, he really kind of builds you to this climactic point that you've been waiting for, that you can't hear in just a piece of music. In this one, you can, which is very clever, but sometimes you get to hear that in a big symphony of how he's trying to really kind of capture you over that period of time to kind of build to that high point. This piece does that in a very quick
That's
way.
right. At the very
That
end. Yeah, yeah,
that's probably
yeah.
why it's really difficult, because you really got to have to kind of start it at a certain pace, and then you have to unleash
Very
everything that you
tricky.
have.
Very, yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yep.
yeah,
In terms of technique and endurance and all the rest of it. But I'm glad I made that note to myself because it was clearly a much slower tempo, and I
yes.
loved it because I
Oh, I
could hear
appreciate that.
everything, and I could linger in this meditation that you really made even more of a meditation of it.
I
And I loved the
appreciate
way
that.
you approached those cadential points. There was no hurry about anything, so it just all, it was luscious.
No,
And
and
then,
it
as you
was
say,
so
it
hard.
did finally start to build to that great last
Yes.
rush, which is
And it's
great.
so hard to do that too.
I'm
It's
sure.
so difficult to, and especially when you're playing on a music instrument, as you know, it's just you're trying to keep that tempo going, but then you can't go too quickly because then it doesn't coalesce. But you
Hmm.
need to keep it in such an extent that that everything is connected. And then the best part of that piece, obviously, is when he gets into the when he gets to the third page, where you get that very huge, fortissimo. It's huge, and then it's like, is he going to drop back? No. He's got your attention at that point. He wants you to continue to keep
Mm,
developing that energy and to really come up to the next fortissimo. And
mm,
then it kind of dies off. And I think that it just is incredible how he did. That's probably one of the most beautiful pieces I've ever played. And I have to be careful. My wife, she's like, "Oh my gosh, you need to stop." She loves it too, but
okay,
she's like,
good.
"You need to stop playing that. I'm gonna start bawling here in the other room,
Eh,
and I can only take as much of this." But then, as musicians, we have to do it over and over again, right? Which makes it 20 times more difficult. I'm like, "Honey, I gotta have this feeling again, and we gotta perform it." So, yeah, but I think
Anyhow,
that
it's
that was
a beauty of an interpretation and a beauty
yes,
of it, and the slower tempo is really, really
yeah,
stunning. I'm a little worried because we have had this situation where I run out of storage or something. I
okay,
think we're okay so far, but
okay,
my camera is giving me this panicked blink. So
okay,
what I want to do is
okay,
kind of wind it down.
okay,
Let's
sure.
the last. What, by the way, in looking kind of through my notes here, just looking at the preludes, the Opus 32, number 10, the B minor,
Yes,
which is
yes.
just before these last three pieces.
Mhm.
Here's where apparently I'm beginning to start to hear something of that mysterious Rachmaninoff sadness. There's kind of
Mhm.
mystery or whatever it
Yes,
might be coming in. And yet that's still an early, well, no, that's the Opus 32. Yeah, so
that's Opus
that's,
32.
yeah,
Those are back at, I think those were 10, I think those were 1911,
isn't
19,
this
19,
amazing?
1911. Yeah.
Yeah, you have mentioned this, I think, earlier in one of our conversations. We're looking at most of this repertoire is
A
pre-World War One.
lot of the, yeah,
Yeah.
a lot of the bulk of his music was generally written before 1917. At
And
least
I just didn't
a
connect
bulk
with
of
that
a lot of
idea.
his piano
Yeah.
pieces.
Until this
So,
album, I just was not connecting with that idea that such a huge amount of his
no, it's, and I
opera.
think, and I'm not, and I don't want to, without getting myself incorrect here. I know, yeah, his preludes were written and his etudes were written in Russia, so they weren't even written
Mm.
in the States.
Oh, that's early. Yep.
Yeah, that was, all of those were written over there.
Pre-revolution. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay, well,
so
the last three pieces are wonderful, and you have a wonderful hail and farewell with the last piece of the
yes,
album. I think it's just
yes,
terrific. Liebeslied that everybody knows, Love, Sorrow, Chrysler, wonderful Chrysler
y-
arrangement, I guess, because it's kind of a folk tune, or is that one of his own tunes? I can't quite remember.
yes. It was a
What
folk tune.
his
It
own,
was, yeah.
just
Mhm.
that makes Chrysler eternal, just there.
Oh,
That piece, the
it's such a
Liebeslied.
great piece, isn't it? It's so beautiful, and
And,
and I'll tell you what, it was so hard to put that together. I remember we must have so recording this thing over and over again. I must have recorded it at least 5 times, and each time I did not like what I was doing with it. And finally, I figured what I needed to do with it. The hard part of that is it sounds easy, but it is extremely difficult because the tempo moves, and Rachmaninoff would put tenth stretches in the hand, so you have to kind of, and that's in the left hand, and so you don't want that to sound loud, but you want this to move, and it was so tough because you need to be light with it, but then you can't. It was so difficult, but I think it came out so well. Again, another piece I was very, very proud of. Um, that I did on that. I think it shows the very romantic type of nuanced approach that he put into it, and I think it gives it a very reminiscent feel towards the end of it that I think that is so. It's I think it's love. It means love sorrow. That's what the piece
Mhm.
means, and you do get that even though it is pleasant. It's very deep. Especially in the last pages of it. You're kind of like, wow, this is really, and if you can, I think what I was trying to reach is that when it got to the end, it's like, okay, this is very reminiscent here, especially these 2 pages, and it's almost heartbreaking, even though it is written, it's in major, isn't it? It is in. I'm not asking you.
Well, C
It's
sharp
in
minor.
major.
No, no,
Yeah,
no, you're right. Is it?
it's in.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you shouldn't be asking me.
Oh my gosh, I know I'm terrible. It is
But
in major.
okay,
So
but you know what? The thing is that if anybody could narrate love's sorrow, it's
mhm.
Rachmaninoff.
No, he
Uh,
does, and he
and
does it, and yeah,
well, and
and
also
forgive
his
me, it is
yeah,
it is it's
and okay,
I'm going to double check.
okay, and also his arrangement.
Yes, yes,
There were moments. First of all, very clever and interesting, but there were one in particular very complex and fun
hmm
harmonic movement in the midst of all kinds of busy work going on that just went, huh? What was that? That was great. Stuff like that. So what I'm getting at is yeah, I'll bet it was hard. I'm glad you
yes.
confessed to that because
Well,
it's
the tempo
crazy
needs to,
wonderful.
well, and the tempo remains consistent,
Yeah.
in that way. Yeah, I think what it is he comes back to A major he does A major at the very last two at the in the very end of it,
Yeah.
which is very reminiscent, and it kind of leaves a very it leaves that type of tone of kind of like an airiness to it, and then it has a very just a very beautiful drop off to it,
Mm.
and I think that that's what he wanted to do with that. But then it does kind of give that love sorrow. It's not so tumultuous that you're thinking like, oh my gosh, this is it's not as I don't want to say it's not deep. It is. It's contrasting to the D major. D major was just here's my heart on my sleeve.
Mm.
This is kind of bittersweet in that sense. I think
Mm.
that that's where he was kind of getting at with that, and you do
Nice.
get that feel. And it is a very encore type of sounding piece. It's a good encore piece.
Nice.
That's
Yeah.
what it was trying to
Yeah.
feel like at the end. So
That would make Chrysler quite happy anyway, the
yeah,
virtuoso. So
oh for
Rachmaninoff
sure.
created a virtuoso pianistic version
Yes,
of Viva's Sleep.
yes,
Vocalise, Opus 34, number 14, C sharp minor. Wow, that's a lot
yes,
of words. And
yes.
you mentioned, I'm horrible, let me try, Zoltan Kosic.
Koshish. Yep.
Koshish,
Hmm.
okay,
Hmm.
who I guess was a pianist. Now I see how dumb I am,
Yes,
a virtuoso pianist, and so this is an
yes.
arrangement by Koshish
Hmm.
of this Vocalise of Rachmaninoff, yeah,
Yes.
Opus 30, and we're in the Opus 34 area. Boy, I'm going to get into my Opus 30s when I have leisure time of Rachmaninoff, have a good browse. Anyway, number 14, C sharp minor, another of his most famous pieces.
Yes.
It's also fairly long. It runs about 7 minutes, and I love how I can hear the voicing so well.
Yes.
Okay, go.
Yes. Oh yeah, no, for sure. And I think that the Rachmaninoff always had his counter melodies in the bass, and you can
Mm,
hear the chromaticism kind of fluctuating throughout.
yeah.
So the right hand is important, but the left hand is just as important as the right. So you need to hear the melody in the left hand as in addition to the right hand. Yeah, it was that, and I've been
Oh,
performing
that's
that for
nice.
yeah,
Nice.
I've been performing that for such a long time. And actually that I go to the orchestral version. I
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
I try not to listen to anybody play the piano version to kind of get an idea where
Oh,
they got their ideas
good.
from. I always listen to the orchestral version of it for interpretation because the orchestral version really gives me an idea. There's actually another version of it too that I think is a lot more complex, but I think that the way that Koshish put this together, it was pianistic in
Mm,
the way that he captured it,
yeah,
and I think that it
that's
captured
exactly
the
right
idea.
then. Yeah, that would be exactly right then, for sure.
Yeah, I
Oh,
think that if you made it too orchestral and too thick, I don't think that it would really work. And I think there's another rendition that is very thick in texture, and I don't think it works as well as this one. So,
okay, now, in 100 words or less,
yes, yes,
because
the last piece,
I'm
right?
expecting the computer to go, no more storage, no more storage, we're done, you're dead, goodbye. The last piece is worth the price of admission, as far as I'm concerned. Alone in the World,
Yes,
Jerry Goldsmith, arranged by Jed
yes.
Distler. Tell me the story, because I just
I
was not
will.
clear.
Yes. Okay, I'll tell it very quickly. So very quickly, my wife would love that comment, by the way. She would have loved that comment because she said this is the piece that I think is the most defining piece on the recording.
It is, without doubt. Yeah.
So, no, we actually put it together. So when I was talking about Rachmaninoff kind of using that open seventh chord, and that's certainly something that's foundational in jazz. I talked with Jed Dissler, who composed this. I said, could you put together a piece? And I took Jerry Goldsmith's piece from that was actually heard in the movie The Russia House, which is actually a spy movie, great movie. It was actually the first time a film directing area from the United States could actually come into Russia
Hmm.
and film.
I'll have to see that
And
film for sure
oh
now.
yeah,
Yeah.
it shows different landscapes of Russia. Oh my gosh, it really does capture the spirit
My hard disk is
of
almost full.
yes.
So we're gonna,
No,
because I'm determined to get this thing up. Okay,
no.
so
Okay, no, but it's a great piece, and I think it captures the spirit of Rachmaninoff as maybe inspiring film directors, film music people that do film music, and I think that we wanted to capture it that way. So I think it really does kind of set it off with a very good end. So
okay, now sorry about all this rush in the 11th hour here, but as you know, we've had this trouble where my computer is having trouble taking all this
no, you're
megabytes.
good.
I'm
You're
jammed.
good.
So I would like to thank for
Yes.
this chat, pianist Ian Gindes. We're talking about your 2023 Navona CD release. This will all go up at Performing Arts Review, and at some point I have to go back because I've got to write the review, and that's when I'll finally figure out what I've been trying to talk about all night. But anyway, you're a wonderful Rachmaninoff piano works, a terrific CD. So many, many thanks. Appreciate
Thanks, Dan. And that was it was a tough recording to put together, and I really appreciate it. So we finally got it done.
it. Okay, good. All right. See ya.
All right, Dan.